I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve. For 50 years, that line has been part of how the world understood Pearl Harbor, the voice of Japan's greatest admiral at the moment of his triumph, a concession of defeat wrapped inside a victory. Isoroku Yamamoto never said it. There is no letter, no diary entry, no witness account that predates a screenplay. The line was written for a 1970 Hollywood film, and it has been circling the world as history ever since. What Yamamoto actually said, privately, in letters, in documented conversations over the years before and after the attack, is stranger and more devastating than anything invented for him. And it opens a question the famous fake quote obscures. What did this man understand in the hours after Pearl Harbor, or that almost no one around him did? December 8, 1941. The operations room of the battleship Nagato, somewhere in the inland sea of Japan. On deck and in the corridors, Yamamoto's staff is celebrating. The reports coming in over the radio are extraordinary. A battleship navy wrecked in the morning, hundreds of American aircraft destroyed on the ground. The Pacific balance of power shifted before noon. The greatest Japanese naval victory in decades. The Admiral himself sits motionless. Those who were there said afterward that he spent that day sunk in apparent depression. The question is why? Answering it requires going back much further than December 7th. Isoroku Yamamoto is, by 1941, 57 years old, 5 feet 3 inches tall, broad-shouldered, meticulous in his dress. To his left hand is missing the index and middle fingers, lost at the Battle of Tsushima in 1905, when he was 19 and Japan's navy first announced itself to the world. His geisha companions called him 80 sen, a joke about the cost of a manicure falling when you have fewer fingers. He appears to have found this funny. From 1919 to 1921, he studies at Harvard University. He learns English, he learns poker, and then, by the accounts of men who played with him, he becomes obsessive about it, staying at the table through the night, winning hand after hand. One summer, he hitchhikes across the country. He drives the roads. He visits automobile factories in Detroit and watches the production lines and understands what he is looking at. So a classmate remembers him as exceptionally curious and imaginative. When asked how he learned bridge so quickly, Yamamoto gives a quiet answer. If he can hold 5,000 Chinese characters in his mind, 52 cards are not difficult. Back in Japan, he becomes one of his Navy's most forward-thinking officers. He sees, before most of his contemporaries, that the battleship era is ending and that carrier aviation will define the next war. He is sent to Washington as a naval attaché. He gambles with American naval officers. He makes friends. He pays attention. By the late 1930s, the political climate in Japan has shifted sharply. The tripartite pact with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy is celebrated in Tokyo as a masterstroke. Yamamoto says, loudly and repeatedly, and that it is a catastrophic mistake, that a war with the United States is a war Japan cannot win. His opposition earns him death threats. Letters arrive at his home and his office. His colleagues, fearing assassination, arrange for him to be transferred to sea duty. Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, where he is harder to reach and his political objections become someone else's concern. In 1940, he meets with Prime Minister Fumimaro Konoye. He tells Konoye exactly what he believes. "I can guarantee to put up a tough fight for the first 6 months," he says, "but I have absolutely no confidence as to what would happen if it went on for 2 or 3 years." That same year, speaking to a group of school children, he says, "Japan cannot beat America. Therefore, Japan should not fight America." This is the man who designs the Pearl Harbor attack. There is no clean resolution to that fact. Yamamoto has thought harder about this problem than anyone else in the room, has arrived at a conclusion he cannot escape. Japan will lose a long war, and has then asked himself the only remaining question. Given that this war is coming regardless of what he says or does, is there a blow that could be struck early enough, devastating enough, to force a negotiated peace before that long war can consume everything? He does not believe it will work. He bets on it anyway. He is a gambler, and he knows the house odds as well as anyone alive. The plan he builds is unlike anything the Imperial Japanese Navy has attempted. Captain Minoru Genda, the 37-year-old operational architect Yamamoto, assigns to work out the details, is perhaps the only man who grasps it fully. Genda understands something most naval officers of the era do not: that the future of naval war is not single carriers launching raids, but multiple carriers concentrated and operated as a single weapon. He designs the strike accordingly: 6 fleet carriers, 2 waves, complete surprise as the non-negotiable condition. He tells Yamamoto, secrecy is the keynote and surprise the all-important factor. The plan has been built for a bold executor. The commander it gets is Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo. Nagumo is 54, heavy-set, experienced, and assigned by the Navy Ministry in Tokyo on the basis of seniority, without Yamamoto's input. His entire naval career has been built on surface ships, though he has never commanded a carrier operation. The plan requires boldness. It will receive caution. These 2 facts will shape everything that follows. The attack's primary targets are the American aircraft carriers. Yamamoto and Genda both understand that the battleship era is ending and that the carriers are what must be destroyed. The attack is designed around them. There is one problem. When the Japanese strike force arrives north of Oahu on the morning of December 7th, 1941, the USS Enterprise is at sea delivering aircraft to Wake Island. The USS Lexington is en route to Midway Atoll. The USS Saratoga is on the west coast for repairs. It is the first Sunday in 1941 that all 3 have been simultaneously absent from Pearl Harbor. Nagumo has no idea where they are. Dawn breaks over the Pacific north of Oahu, in cloud cover at roughly 3,500 feet, the sea running at moderate swells. Aboard the flagship Akagi and 5 sister carriers, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, 423 aircraft are being brought up from the hangar decks. Before they launch, Yamamoto's message has already been distributed to the fleet. The rise or fall of the Empire depends upon this battle. Everyone will do his duty with utmost efforts. On Akagi's mast, the Z flag rises, the same signal flown at Tsushima 36 years before, when Yamamoto was 19 and still had all his fingers. At 6 o'clock, the first wave lifts off. 183 aircraft. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida leads them from the cockpit of a Nakajima B-5N torpedo bomber. He is 38 years old, over 3,000 hours in the air, in a white Hachimaki headband tied around his leather flight helmet, the traditional warrior's wrap. At 7:40 over Oahu, Fuchida slides back his canopy. The harbor below is still. No alert, no movement. He fires a green flare, the attack signal. At 7:49, he sends the coded command, 222, Totsugeki Seiyo, attack. 8 minutes later, he transmits back to the Akagi, Tora, Tora, Tora. Complete surprise achieved. What follows is 23 minutes of precisely executed destruction. 4 battleships sunk: Arizona, Oklahoma, West Virginia, California. 4 more damaged. 11 other vessels struck. 2,403 Americans killed before the morning is over. 188 aircraft destroyed on the ground. For the loss of 29 planes and 55 airmen. The Imperial Japanese Navy has wrecked an entire battle fleet on a Sunday morning. The smoke over Battleship Row rises thousands of feet into the Pacific sky. and on the shore of Pearl Harbor, a few hundred meters from the burning ships, approximately 4.5 million barrels of fuel oil sit in above-ground cylindrical tanks, undamaged, untouched. Without that fuel, the Pacific Fleet would have to retreat to the west coast. The repair yards are untouched, the dry docks are untouched, the submarine base is untouched. The smoke is enormous. Everything burning will stop burning eventually. The infrastructure that will allow it all to be rebuilt is still standing. The pilots return to their carriers and make their reports. The second wave has achieved its objectives. Losses, though, have risen. The first wave lost 9 aircraft, and the second lost 20. Anti-aircraft fire over Pearl Harbor has stiffened sharply after the initial shock, and the sky over Oahu is now dangerous. On Akagi's bridge, Nagumo considers the question before him, whether to send a third wave against what remains. The fuel storage, the dry docks, the repair facilities, the submarine base. The case for going back is real. The case against it is equally real, and he goes through each point in turn. He does not know where the American carriers are. They are out there, somewhere, with aircraft that could find him before he can withdraw. A third strike would take hours to prepare, and the returning aircraft would have to land in darkness. Night carrier operations exist in only one navy in the world, and it is not his. So his fuel situation is already constrained. The strike force sailed with 7 of the planned 8 fast tankers, the 8th having suffered an engine breakdown before departure. He has accomplished everything his orders required. He gives the order to withdraw. On Akagi's bridge, the young officers look at one another. None of them speaks. The account most often repeated is this: that Fuchida came back aboard, still in his flight gear, went directly to Nagumo's bridge, and argued urgently for another wave. That he laid out exactly what had been left behind. That Nagumo refused, and the chance was lost. It is a story that places Fuchida as the man who saw clearly and was overruled. Minoru Genda, present aboard the Akagi that morning, grounded by illness, there for the entire aftermath, stated flatly, the conversation never happened. There had been no third wave in the plan to begin with. Fuchida flew home having done everything he was asked. It was only after the war, in debriefings with American interrogators who were laying out, for the first time, the full extent of what the attack had left intact, that Fuchida began to understand the scale of what had been missed. And it was in the years that followed, as he talked and wrote about Pearl Harbor, that a different version of the morning gradually took shape. One in which he had seen it all clearly, had tried, had been refused. Gender was also there. He was also talking in those same years. His account does not change. The two versions cannot both be true, and the record, the original orders, the strike plan, the contemporaneous logs, supports Gender. What remains is a witness who learned in fragments, and over years of post-war conversation, the dimensions of a morning he had actually been present for, and who placed himself inside it differently as understanding arrived. Aboard the Nagato, Yamamoto waits in his operations room. The results of the attack have come in over the radio, along with Nagumo's reports. Then, quietly, the Admiral turns to his Chief of Staff. Admiral Nagumo is going to withdraw. He is right. He already knows why. The following morning, at a conference aboard the battleship Yamato, Yamamoto supports Nagumo's decision. The tactical reasoning is defensible, and he knows that. What none of them fully grasps yet, what the weeks and months ahead will slowly reveal, is the weight of what has been left standing on the shore of Pearl Harbor. As the fuel tanks keep supplying the fleet, as the dry docks operate through the winter, as ships that should be on the bottom return to sea, it is only then that Yamamoto begins to describe the attack, in the accounts of those around him, as a great mistake. That reckoning comes later. On December 8th, 2 other things consume him. The first is a piece of bureaucratic wreckage, the diplomatic notification to Washington, the formal statement breaking off negotiations, which amounted under international convention to a final warning before hostilities, was supposed to arrive 30 minutes before the bombs fell. It was delivered to Secretary of State Cordell Hull nearly an hour after the attack had already ended, due to decoding and transcription delays at the Japanese embassy. American cryptanalysts had read the message before the Japanese ambassador finished typing it, so the political consequence unfolds immediately. What Yamamoto designed as a strike at the last possible moment before war becomes, in American political memory, an attack without warning. The next day, President Roosevelt calls it a date which will live in infamy. 30 minutes of embassy delay transformed what was meant as a declared act of war into something the American public could only understand as treachery. And that understanding unites a fractured country behind total mobilization in a way a properly delivered declaration might never have managed. Yamamoto grasps this at once. The second thing consuming him is the knowledge that the fuel tanks are still full. 5 weeks after the attack, on January 9, 1942, Yamamoto writes a private letter to the journalist Ogata Taketora. He has heard the celebrations in Tokyo, so he has read the dispatches. He writes, "A military man can scarcely pride himself on having smitten a sleeping enemy. It is more a matter of shame, simply, for the one smitten. I would rather you made your appraisal after seeing what the enemy does, since it is certain that, angered and outraged, he will soon launch a determined counterattack." This is the real statement, not Hollywood's version, not a moment of concession wrapped in triumph. This is a man writing from inside a prediction he made before the first bomb fell, watching it take shape exactly as he expected. The enemy was not sleeping in Yamamoto's understanding of events. He had been inside its universities. He had played cards with its officers. He had stood in its factories and watched what happens when an industrial economy decides to build warships. No, there is a second letter, written in the early weeks of 1942 to a colleague. He writes, "Britain and America may have underestimated Japan somewhat, but from their point of view it's like having one's hand bitten rather badly by a dog one was feeding. It seems that America, in particular, is determined before long to embark on full-scale operations against Japan. The mindless rejoicing at home is really deplorable. It makes me fear that the first blow at Tokyo will make them wilt on the spot." He is predicting the Doolittle raid. It will come in April 1942. He is predicting American mobilization, already underway as he writes. He is naming the psychological fragility of the Japanese home front under bombing and fearing it. He wrote all of this within weeks of Pearl Harbor. He is not describing what has happened, and he is watching the future arrive and naming it as it comes. Yamamoto had said 6 months. Now the clock runs. In January and February of 1942, Japanese forces sweep across the Pacific, the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, Burma. The octopus, as he once described it, extending its tentacles in every direction. The first months are everything he promised. They are the only months he promised anything about. April 18th, 1942. 16 American B-25 bombers launched from the carrier Hornet bombed Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, and Kobe. The physical damage is minimal, but Tokyo has been bombed. Yamamoto had written that the first blow at the home islands would make the public wilt. It does the opposite. But the raid lands on Yamamoto like a personal humiliation. He had guaranteed the defense of Japan's cities, and he has failed. His biographers record that his normally clear judgment was warped by the Doolittle raid. It pushes him toward a battle he is already planning, a decisive engagement at Midway Atoll, designed to find and destroy the American carriers he missed in December. He finds them. They find him first. June 4th through 7th, 1942. The Battle of Midway, Enterprise, Yorktown, and Hornet are in position north of the atoll. Their locations known, their orders clear. In 4 days of fighting, Japan loses the Akagi, the Kaga, the Soryu, and the Hiryu. 4 fleet carriers. The same strike force that destroyed Battleship Row is itself destroyed. 348 aircraft gone. The experienced pilots who had been flying since the campaigns in China go down with them. The Battle of Midway concludes in the first week of June of 1942. 6 months, almost to the day. Yamamoto's prediction, delivered to a prime minister, repeated to school children, set down in letters and documented conversations across several years, comes due. He had described a corridor of success followed by a war he could not win. He had been given the corridor exactly. The decisive blow that might have forced a negotiated peace went down with 4 burning carriers. His forces are diminishing. America's are not. The long fight he said from the beginning he could not win is now the only fight left. The story has 3 endings. Yamamoto's comes on April 18th, 1943, 1 year to the day after the Doolittle raid. American signals intelligence has intercepted and decoded his schedule. An inspection tour of Japanese positions in the Solomon Islands, departure time specified, routes mapped. Boat 16 P-38. Lightnings lift off from Guadalcanal. They intercept Yamamoto's transport over the jungle of Bougainville Island. His aircraft goes down in the trees. He is found still seated in his chair, hand on his sword. The Americans, whose resolve he had predicted, using the intelligence capabilities he had warned about, doing precisely what he said they would do. He is 59 years old. Nagumo's ending comes at Saipan on July 6, 1944. His career at sea effectively ended at Midway, though the dying takes 2 more years. He is on the island with ground forces and no ships as American forces close the perimeter. He takes his own life, the one morning that defined everything. The morning he turned the strike force north and left the fuel tank standing is the shadow he carries the entire distance. Fuchida's ending belongs to a different story entirely. The man who fired the attack signal over Pearl Harbor, who transmitted Torah, Torah, Torah into the historical record, becomes a Christian evangelist after the war. The catalyst is the account of Jacob de Chazer, an American airman who was imprisoned and tortured by the Japanese and who returned to Japan after the war as a missionary, preaching forgiveness to the people who had harmed him. Fuchida converts. He travels American cities for years, telling his testimony. The man who led the attack on the United States ends his life in America, in the company of the people whose country he once bombed. He had walked the streets of those cities. He had studied in their universities, played cards with their officers, stood in their factories, and understood, in a way almost nobody in Tokyo did, what the country he was about to attack was capable of when it was angry. He knew all of this. He wrote it down. He said it aloud to prime ministers and school children and colleagues and journalists in letters that survived the war and can still be read today. And on December the 7th, 1941, he attacked anyway, not because he believed he could win, but because the decision for war had been made by men with less knowledge than he had, and he was the man they needed to execute it, and he could not sit down at a table with a losing hand and fold. 6 months later, almost to the day, the Battle of Midway ended. The carriers he had failed to find in December came back to sink the ones he had launched against Pearl Harbor. Everything he had predicted had happened, and everything he had feared had begun. The sleeping giant line sounds like history. It sounds like a man who understood his own defeat in real time, a conqueror with the clarity to look into the future and name what he saw. But the letters tell a different story. The story of a man who never believed the giant was sleeping at all, who had seen it awake and working, who struck it anyway, and then sat alone, surrounded by celebration, understanding exactly what he had started.